I just want to ask you this morning, do you want the good news or the really good news? Now, I know you probably want the really good news, but the fact is that the good news about Jesus, it just keeps getting better. You know, there's a little movie line that says, talking about telling stories, and it says, it gets better every time I tell it. You know what? The good news about Jesus gets better every time I tell it. It just keeps getting better because there's no limit, there's no end to the goodness of God and how good the good news really is. So I want to share with you a little bit about the good news and why we need to be grounded in the good news of Jesus. But before we get there, let me ask you another question. Who's ever written a list of rules to live by here? Maybe like written out, well, I will get out of bed when my alarm goes off. And, I will not abuse my neighbour when their dog keeps barking all night. Or something like, who's ever written a few people, I don't know if you're a list person. I'm a list person. My lists don't always work, do they, Del? But sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. But, I'm a list person. And sometimes... there are some people who write rules for everything. They have a list for absolutely everything in their life. There are people who are just like that. But you know what? There's a whole lot of people who aren't like that too, that don't have lists for and rules for everything in their life. But one thing I've discovered is that it's amazing how widespread the idea is that Christianity is all about rules and lists of rules. It's incredible. If you just talk to someone who doesn't have a real relationship with God, doesn't believe in God or not a follower of Jesus, and there's a fair chance that if you ask them what they think Christianity is about, that they'll either give you an answer that's either directly or at least coloured by the idea that Christianity is about keeping rules and lists of rules. There's a fair chance because a lot of people who aren't followers of Jesus actually think that. And I'm asking the question this morning, why is that? I wonder why that is. I want to try and answer the question. I'm glad you asked the question. Well, number one, it's because we, meaning the church in general, haven't done a very good job over the years of communicating how good the gospel is and how good it is to know God and to love God, and that it's all about relationship with Him and growing in Jesus, and it's not really about keeping rules at all. We haven't done a very good job of communicating that. But there's another reason. And if you're anything like me, I know there's a number of people here that probably did grow up in church. I grew up in church. I came from a young child. And if you grew up in church like I did, there's a pretty fair chance that you were exposed to this kind of mixture of the old covenant, which was about rules, by the way, the old covenant and the new covenant, which is not about rules. So, because I just know that when I grew up in church as a Christian, as a young person, I loved God. I wanted to follow God, and I would read the Bible. Someone gave me a Bible at a very early age, a nicely bound, black Bible with the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I read that thing through a number of times, quite a few times. And I came across a verse that said this. It says, the eyes of, Second Chronicles 16, verse 9, by the way. And it says, the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the whole earth, that He would show Himself strong, I'm quoting from the King James here, on behalf of those whose heart is perfect toward Him. So it's like God is up there watching down. He's looking at us. He's looking for that perfect person. And for that person, God's going to be a deliverer. And I can tell you that as sure as anything, I wanted to be that person. It's like this giant periscope looking down, looking around. God was looking for the perfect person because that's the one that God was going to deliver in a tight spot. And I was thinking, well, I just want to be that person. But I'd never heard anyone say that actually, you know what? God sent His own Son, Jesus, to be the perfect person and to be our deliverer. And because Jesus came as a perfect sacrifice for us, I don't actually have to be perfect. I just need to be in Jesus. I never heard anyone saying that. And so I grew up thinking that, well, those kind of verses from the Old Testament, they were pretty important and pretty real. And maybe some of you did in the same way. The Old Testament, what we've got to understand is that the Old Testament of the Bible, the first 2/3 of the Bible, is all about the way God dealt with and the way God revealed Himself to one specific nation, the nation of Israel. It was important. And and Israel's been so blessed because God chose them as a nation. And the first 2/3 of the Bible is all about the way God dealt with Israel and the way he revealed himself to Israel during a specific period of history. And the last 1/3 of the Bible is all about how God has revealed himself and how God deals with every one of us here today. Even if you've got Jewish heritage, that's totally good. That's a wonderful blessing. But the New Testament is for you as well, because Jesus came to show you the full revelation of God. The Bible is really clear about this, that Jesus is the 100% the absolute representation of the Father God. So it's true. He absolutely is. So we need to read the New Testament. And the word Bible is not actually in the Bible. People invented the word Bible, and we give people a copy of the Bible. And look, if you've been a Christian for some years, by all means, you should read the Old Testament because it's wonderful. I love it. I grew up reading it, and I love the Old Testament. But if you're a person who's just becoming a follower of Jesus, I'm suggesting you start in the middle and read the New Testament and learn about Jesus, learn to connect with him. There was some religious people. Jesus was having a meeting, a talk with them one day, and they were confronting Jesus because they didn't like the fact that Jesus had all this new stuff. They didn't like it. They were always wanting to go back to the old, and Jesus confronted them, and he said, you know what your problem is? You search the scriptures trying to find life, but you won't come to me that you might have life. So I want to tell you, friends, that life is in Jesus. Life is in Jesus. I'm not saying don't read the Bible. By all means, read the Bible. Read the New Testament first. But life is in Jesus. That's where we need to be. So, what changed from the old to the new, and why do we, as New Testament, New Covenant believers, need to focus on the new? That's what I want to share with you this morning. So, firstly, where did rules come from? Well, there was this guy, the Old Testament is rule. It's called the Law and the Prophets. It's all about the rules that they had to live by. Okay, so this guy called Abraham. And Abraham was a great man of faith, and he knew God personally. He had a real relationship with God, and he walked with God, the Bible says. He knew what God was like because God spoke to him personally. And it was wonderful. And God made promises to Abraham that are still relevant for us today. But what happened is, after a while, after a few hundred years, Abraham's descendants got into trouble. And what happened? They lost their revelation of God. They lost their understanding of what God was really like. And I'm asking you, or saying this morning, when a society like we live in our society, in our culture today, when a society loses its revelation of God, they start to move into things that will ultimately destroy life. And I wish we had time to talk about that this morning, but we won't. But our society is losing its understanding, its picture, its revelation of God. So what happened is God raised up another leader called Moses. And God gave Moses a list of rules that became really important to try and bring the people back to God. And if you read the Old Testament, there are hundreds of rules there. Hundreds of laws. You have to do this, you should do that, do this. And if you don't, and the rules were really important. And they were actually really good because God gave those rules so that the people could get an understanding of God. They were to guide the people. They were to give boundaries for behavior. They were to give some understanding of what God was like. And they were actually really good. Now, all the rules, I said there were hundreds of rules. They could be summarized by, who's ever heard of the 10 Commandments? Most of us have heard the 10 Commandments. I've preached a whole series of messages on the 10 Commandments in the past before I understood this principle. And I'm not proud to say that, but I preached on the 10 Commandments. And look, the 10 Commandments are wonderful, but they're not life-giving. That's the issue. You can't get life from them. And we are more into life that comes through Jesus. So, the 10 Commandments, things like, don't have any other gods before me, don't make any idols, don't misuse the name of the Lord your God, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. All those things were actually really good and necessary at that time. And like I said, they were needed to guide people and give boundaries. You know, boundaries are really important. If you're a parent here today, you know that you have to have boundaries for your kids, right? Everyone knows that. You know you have to have boundaries for your kids. If you yes, you have to have boundaries for your kids, right? Otherwise, they just go crazy. And that's so important. But let me tell you something about boundaries. As good as they are, boundaries don't actually change anyone's heart. They don't make them a different person. They guide and they provide, boundaries for behavior, but they don't actually change a person's heart. And that was the issue with the rules. The rules that God provided, they had both an upside and a downside. The upside was that they were actually really good. I mean, King David wrote in Psalm 19, he said this, "The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul." No, stick that up there. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. God's law is actually really good and wholesome and a blessing. But you know what? While David was writing those words, he was thinking, well, a bit later on, David got into some trouble himself later on, as you might know if you've read his story. And he wrote another psalm, Psalm 51. And when he had to cry out on the mercy of God, he said this in Psalm 51. God, you don't desire a sacrifice, or I would offer one. You don't want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You know, something on the inside of David. He knew that the laws that they had, which included animal sacrifices, because when you made a mistake if you sinned, you had to bring a sacrifice to cover that sin. That's just the way it was. And so David knew instinctively that God had something much bigger and much better in mind. That's why he said, God, you don't really want sacrifices. What you're after is a broken spirit. What you're after is someone's heart that is open towards you. What you're after is someone whose life is ready for change. David knew that back in the Old Testament days. He even knew that. So the downside of the rules is this. They came with conditions and obligations. And the first one, we're only going to take a moment with this. The first one was, if you didn't keep all the rules, you were out. Basically, the Bible actually says, if you keep all of them but fail in one, it doesn't work. You had to keep every one of the rules. And that was a real issue. You know, and maybe this morning you grew up in a home that was a bit like that, where you had to keep all the rules, and if you made a mistake in one, you were sort of outed. Like a performance-based thing where everything was good while you were good, but if you weren't good, it wasn't good. Maybe you grew up in a home like that. And I just want to say to you that that's where the love of God really comes into our hearts, because he came to bring wholeness for each one of us and to be a loving Father. And he's not saying to you this morning, so long as you're good, it'll be good. He's saying, I just love you. I love you so much. And I've said this before, I know. I'm going to keep on saying it. We will never stop talking here about the love of God. We're just not, because it's the one thing that brings healing. I'm going to come to that in a moment. The other thing about the rules, the downside of rules, was that you had to keep coming back all the time because, if you sinned and you had to bring an animal sacrifice, that was fine. What about next week or next month or the next time you made a mistake? You had to come back again and bring another sacrifice. And here's the problem with that. Apart from the fact that it got pretty expensive, it got expensive. But you know what? Continually revisiting what was needed to deal with sin, the very fact that the repetitive nature of sacrifices proved the point that sin was not being dealt with, that people's hearts were not really being changed. The laws never actually changed anyone's heart. So what happened to the old and what does new look like today for us? That's where we are. So the law existed, the Old Testament law existed for 1,000 years, over 1,000 years, and then everything changed. I mean, absolutely everything changed, and this is where it gets interesting. Because Jesus came to introduce a completely new way. Now, I've known that for a long time. You already know that. Jesus came to bring a new way. But I wonder, do we understand how comprehensively was the finishing point for the old? Because a lot of times we read the Old Testament and we think, well, that's really cool, that's really good, I should apply that in my life, you know. And there are things you can apply from there. But I want to read this to you from Hebrews chapter 10. I was reading this yesterday and I saw this in Hebrews chapter 10 and it really amazed me. Let's read it. First, Christ or Jesus said, you did not want animal sacrifices or sin offerings or burnt offerings or other offerings for sin, nor were you pleased with them, though they're required by the law of Moses. Then Jesus said, look, I have come to do your will. He cancels the first covenant in order to put the second into effect. So the Old Testament, the old way of thinking about rules, do this, do that, don't do this, do that, it's cancelled. Now, I don't think we really appreciate how fully it has been cancelled. The very fact that we're having this conversation today, after 2,000 years, shows that, well, I know the way I grew up. Okay, I grew up in church, and I got a lot of Old Testament thinking. A lot of the Old Testament stuff. It was there all the time. Maybe not, it wasn't spoken out like that, but it was Old Testament theology, you know what? Dressed up as New Covenant theology. It was a mixture of old and new. And I want us to understand we've got to get rid of that. And we've got to come back to Jesus and living in His promises, His words, and living in the life that He came to give us. It's so important that we get that. So then Jesus said, I've come to do your will, and He cancelled the first covenant. Now, I looked up that word cancelled, and I've never seen anyone else or read anyone else say this before, and I was just amazed. I'm sure plenty of scholars have looked into this. That word cancel is really important. In the New Testament, it's used 24 times, the word cancel. And this one here in Hebrews 10 is the only reference that it's translated by cancel. It's a Greek word, anero. It's translated cancel here. In every other one of the 23 uses, it's about someone being killed or murdered or executed. Now, I know this sounds pretty violent here, but I have to tell you, Jesus didn't just end or cancel the old covenant, He killed it. Jesus got rid of the old covenant. Every one of the other uses of that word in the New Testament, it says kill, murder, execute. I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but the old covenant is gone. Gonski. It's totally finished. It's been killed off. And it's time that we began to celebrate. And now this is the best news out. What it's really saying is, God is not saying to you this morning, when you keep this lot of rules and this list of rules, then I'll accept you. He's not saying that. He's saying, I sent Jesus to be the once for all, the perfect, complete, comprehensive sacrifice for sin. And I want you to come to fall at His feet and acknowledge Him and welcome Him into your life and make Him the Lord and Master of your life. The old is gone. The law of Moses, it had a definite end point. So what do we got now? What's the new? What does the new look like? We have a new covenant. Here it goes. Also Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16. This is the new covenant. The writer of this book is saying, this is the new covenant I will make with my people on that day, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their hearts. I will write them on their minds. Then He says, I will never again remember their sins and lawless deeds. So God is in the business of actually forgetting your sins. Now, this is especially relevant for our past sins, but also our present sins and our future sins. God says, I am never again going to remember their sins and their lawless deeds because of Jesus. You know, one of the biggest issues that we have as humans, as people, we say, yeah, God, you forget sins, that's right, but we have trouble forgetting them, don't we? And maybe that's your, what's happening in your mind. You're thinking, well, gee, that was pretty bad in the past. We have a lot more trouble forgetting our past sins than what God does. Because He's promised, He said, I will never again remember their sins and their lawless deeds. We have a new covenant. You know what? The devil wants to keep reminding you of your past as well. That's why, you should look that up, Hebrews 10, 16 and verse 17, and write it on your fridge and say, God said he will never again remember my lawless deeds. And don't listen to the devil when he says, what about that? Just don't listen to it. Second thing we've got a new covenant. We've also got a new and living way, the Bible says. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 10, verse 20. It says, by his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. And since we have a great high priest who rules over God's house, that is Jesus, let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. You know what? For the audience of this letter to the Hebrews, who understood the Old Testament law, they understood the way it was, this was a shocking statement. Absolutely shocking, because they had built their whole national life, their national identity, their culture, their spiritual heritage, everything about them had been built around the existence of the temple in their midst. So they had this big building called a temple, and they would go there, and it harked back to the Old Testament, where only once a year, the priest, fulfilling certain conditions, could go through the veil, a massive thick veil, into the presence of God with fear and trembling. Fearful. They used to tie a rope around their feet and out through the bottom of the curtain and put bells around their garments so that they would know, if this guy gets struck dead, what are we got to do, boys? We've got to pull him out. We're going to pull his carcass out. That's how fearful they were of God. And once a year, fulfilling certain specific conditions, the high priest would go in carrying this offering of blood just to present to. I'm telling you, they built their whole national culture and identity around this. So when Jesus is talking to his disciples or to the Pharisees, the religious dudes, one day, and he says, you know what? Looking at the temple, he said, just destroy this temple and I'll build it again in 3 days. They went off their nut, because you can't. Who do you think you are? You're going to destroy our whole national identity? Well, the Bible says that the New Testament says that when Jesus died on the cross, that veil was torn in two. I think it was about 6 or 9 inches thick. It was a massive woven piece of cloth. You would need a couple of locomotives to tear that thing. It says that the veil of the temple was torn in two from the top. To the bottom. And so when it says here that Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain, that's what he's talking about. He's saying that not only can the high priest go in whenever he wants, you could go into the presence of God whenever you want. And the verse that I love, it's in 1 John, I think chapter 4, it says that we should come boldly to the throne of grace. And not just in fear and trembling, it says we can come boldly to God's throne. So we've got a new covenant, a new way into the presence of God. We've also got a new commandment. I want to talk about this in the coming weeks. It says, Jesus said, I'm giving you a new commandment. Okay, so there's a commandment, okay? It sounds like a rule. We'll get to that in a moment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. You know what? That commandment supersedes all the others from the Old Testament. It supersedes them. Because if we get this, Jesus said, I'm commanding you here. It's a rule. Love each other just as I have loved you. Now that means, in the Old Testament, there's a rule about loving your neighbor. And I want to elaborate on this later, but it says, love your neighbor as yourself. Actually, neighbor means, it literally means other Jewish people. That's what it means. Love your neighbor means love your relatives. Sometimes that's hard, isn't it? It actually means love your relatives the same way as you love yourself. Well, if I love myself, I should be able to love them. Okay, Jesus said, no. He lifted the bar a lot higher. He said, I want you to love people, each other, as I have loved you. In other words, that's with a sacrificial love. He sacrificed himself. He gave up himself. It's a much, much higher standard. So it's not just a new model, a revamped version. When we talk about the new covenant that we have with God, the new arrangement that we can have with God, it's not just a revamped version of the old. I've had a little bit to do with new product development over the last decade or so, where I was working. And I'll just give you a little bit about new product development for anybody who's interested in inventing things or whatever. There's a rule that says this: you never bring a new product into a new market. The risk is too high. What you do is you bring an existing product into a new market, you broaden the base of your market, or you bring a new product to an existing market, or an existing product to a new market. That's what you do. But you don't put in, is that confusing people? But you don't put a new product into a new market. So the bottom line of that, have I said that right, Matt? Yeah, okay. Okay. So the bottom line is this: incremental change, okay? You don't try and make massive changes if you want to be successful in marketing. I know some people here, you do marketing. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So, okay. So incremental change. And I was just thinking about, the horse and cart. When the horse and cart, someone developed an internal combustion engine and they wanted to make them better. So they made cars by putting an internal combustion engine into a horse and cart. And all they did was they got rid of the horse. Because basically the motive force changed, but the cart didn't change. It was a small change. But the new covenant that God has made with us is not just an improved version of the old. It's more like taking a horse and cart and swapping it for an Airbus A350 or the latest, greatest, biggest airline you can ever imagine. That's what it's like. So the old is gone and the new has come. And I really want to that's my point today, I guess. That's the take-home message for today. Jesus' death on the cross, God did what humans could never do. The sacrifices that people brought, the way that they tried to pay for their own sins, it was never, ever going to be enough, and it never changed anyone's heart. But Jesus' death on the cross, the Bible says he broke the power of sin. He broke the power of sin. It's like someone said his death was like a lightning rod for the judgment of God. Jesus hanging on the cross, it's like the judgment of God was poured out so comprehensively on him, so fully on him, that God does not need or want to judge you. In fact, he doesn't have any judgment left, I don't think. There might be something down the track for some nations down there. Let's read the book of Revelation some other time. But right now, Jesus has been punished fully for our sins. And that's remarkable. So what now? What now? Well, we get to live in his love. We get to live secure in the knowledge that the Father accepts you because of Jesus. And, maybe you've been thinking, here's my last point. Maybe you've been thinking, well, if the New Testament is all about what Jesus has done for us and, the love of God and so on, that's really good. But how come I keep reading do this, do that in the New Testament? All right, I'm glad you asked again. I'm just going to read this one scripture to you in Colossians because it's a very good question. There are actually lists of rules in the New Testament, but they're not rules. But we're going to read one here. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with, here it is, here's the list. Clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness. You going okay? Clothe yourself with humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. I mean, some people are probably having indigestion about now already, just reading that list. It's a list of things that we should do. Okay, and then you can read the rest of it. But let me tell you, there's a key to this. There's a key. And the key is in the first verse. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, do this. See, in the old covenant, it's all about if you do this, you'll be okay. God will accept you. Here in the new covenant that God made with us, he said, I have chosen you. I have made you my special people. I've called you by name. You are mine. and I love you, and I've poured out my goodness upon your life and my grace and my favor upon your life. Since I've chosen you, now you can do this. Because what happens, friends, is that we can, in the strength of God's love, the strength of God's favor, it's because of His grace and acceptance, we can change. It's the same for in a family. You know, when a child knows how much they are loved by their parent, that's what empowers a child to want to change. So I want to change now. I feel so secure in the love of my parents, or the love of my significant parent. I feel secure in that. Now I can change. It's exactly the same for us with the way God loves us, because of His love for us. But it gets even better than that. The last thing is in verse 15. It says, "Let the peace that comes from Jesus rule in your hearts, for as members of one body you are called." In other words, God doesn't even expect you to change in your own strength. He's saying, I'm going to give you the capacity to do that change. The peace that comes from Christ, the strength that comes from Him, the authority that comes from Him, let it rule in your hearts. He's giving you that ability right now to be a different person, to grow and to change. And He's shown the way, and He's given you everything that you need to let His peace rule in your hearts and reign in your hearts. So I'm going to ask our creative team to come back right now. And I just wonder, can we close our eyes for a moment? And I want to ask you, this morning, have you experienced God's love for you in a life-transforming way? Have you known what it is to ask Jesus into your life so fully that you've given your life to Him and you've experienced His love?